Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today I'd like to talk about the subject of how to make friends. This is something that's come up from time to time, I've seen, and so I wanted to offer some advice to people who find this difficult. Quick preface on this is that I am talking primarily about making friends where at least one of the people involved is male. What I'm going to say will apply to friendships between women, but there's there are more layers, there's more complication when it's just two women. So there's some asterisks, and since I've never actually been in a female-female friendship, I can only give very sort of third-hand advice about those things, just a few minor things, which I'll cover sort of at the end of this. So that caveat out of the way. The first thing to note about friendship, making friends, is to understand that there are really two aspects to friendship. One of these aspects is the bond between two human beings, which is kind of common to all human relationships. This is the Greek storge, if you've ever read C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves. The love of the familiar. Familiar in the sense of of or pertaining to the family. The entire human race is an extended family, and so this does apply to all human beings. However, the thing about this is that it needs to be nurtured by being in proximity for some other reason than merely being in proximity. Or rather, that even will work, sort of, but if you're not in proximity for any good reason, you'll have a very hard time with this. So, in general, you need some other reason for it. Amongst families, like blood relatives, well, there's the blood relation there that is why you're together, and so it sort of, is what puts you together for that sort of bond. The other thing in friendship, and again, if you've read C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves, which I highly recommend, there's a great thing where he describes that in lovers, in male-female lovers, that the classic pose for them is face-to-face, whereas the classic pose of friends is side-by-side, together facing some other thing. And so that is, to a great degree, the key to understanding how you go about making friends. The relationship of these two things, really. But that second one is where you find people. You find people through shared interests is not quite the right way to put it. It's a common way. It's really more properly shared activities. Shared activities just happen to very frequently come from shared interests. So, what's the general pattern, to give you sort of the big picture, is that you're going to want to meet people, and then amongst these people, you will find a certain amount of affection for just about everybody. Most easily discerned when they're not around, how much do you miss their presence. For some people, depending, but most people, it's not going to be very much, a little bit. For some people, it's going to be virtually not at all, and how much you enjoy not being in their presence will certainly dominate. Those are the people you don't like. But in a really technical sense, there's you'll always find there's some aspect to them that you can miss. Really helps to get perspective on this one. Thinking back 10 years, since you last saw the person, you can soften the parts you didn't like so much, and it'll show that there's that, multiple layers going on. The part about making friends that really matters, though, are the people where you and the other person really get together, get along very well. You really, there's that common metaphor of you click, which is the metaphor from, two pieces that are meant to fit together, that they then, snap into place and click. It's a good metaphor in that, if you take each person's soul to have a shape, some people, the shape of their soul just isn't very compatible, and others it's much more compatible. They can get much closer, and therefore, within this fallen world, have a much stronger bond. And that's what you're looking for. When you and another person really get along very well, you then are able to have that, the love of the familiar, the family type love of another human being, together with the love of, sharing the love of something else. And it's really sharing the love together of something else that will typically bring you together. But the big thing when it comes to trying to make friends is that it's a numbers game. You need to meet a lot of people in order to find the people whom you really get along with well. Because it's very, very difficult to figure out ahead of time whether or not you and somebody else will really actually mesh together well. and become good friends. And you don't need, incidentally, to you know, you're not looking for like one lifelong friend. It's good to have several friends. But you still need to mesh fairly well. And so it really is a numbers game. There's a lot of similarity here, actually, if you ever look up dating advice. Again, you need to meet a lot of people to find people with whom you're compatible. And so, what you want to do is go about looking for places. Well, first off, okay, if you don't have much in the way of interests other than entertainment, get some. Look around for the things that are interests that you can have that are not simply passive entertainment but involve some sort of activity, and cultivate your interest in those. It is technically speaking possible to share interest in entertainment with somebody, but there are two major problems with this. Um, One of them is that it's very passive, so the amount that you and another person are actually together by shared entertainment is small. I'm sorry, there are actually three problems. One of them is that there just aren't that many places where people get together for the sake of entertainment. Um, there historically, when it was harder to get entertainment, even if you're locked in a closet, you metaphorically, obviously, you would have to sort of get together with other people at least a little bit for the sake of this entertainment. Modern technology has largely gotten rid of that. You can get all the entertainment you want sitting at home for the most part. So, I'm talking passive entertainment like books and movies and television shows and YouTube shows and video games and so on. So, getting together just for the sake of these things is not very common. Um, the third thing is modern entertainment. There's so many options that finding commonalities with other people becomes very hard because there's so much, and people tend to find the things they really, really enjoy. So that you're not likely to have very much in the way of like common enjoyments with people. This is sort of a newer problem. If you go back a ways, when there were far fewer entertainment choices, you're much more likely to find things in common. Like I can remember something like 25 years ago, a friend of mine discovered some anime and had bootleg, fourth, eighth generation copies of the VHS cassette I remember there was Nadia, the Secret of Blue Water, and what was the other one? Evangelion. And the thing is, there weren't many anime series that were available. They're the fan subtitles, that is. And so, he went and showed me, and the thing is, like, there are only a few of these things. And so anything that you liked about anime generally, you had to find in like these 2 or 3 series. And so anyone else who liked pretty much anything about anime at the time would also find it in that series, or, in those few series. Now, with everything, in the modern context where you have, I'm entirely lost touch with this stuff, but although the name Crunchyroll comes to mind, I don't know if that's still going or not. But all these streaming services where you get, stuff within days of it actually showing in Japan and so on, for every single series, well, with dozens of series every season to choose from, the odds that you and somebody else are going to both really like a show aren't all that great. And even if you like one from one series, the odds of you doing this several times become really, really small. So it's not impossible to do this through entertainment. The odds are stacked against you, given the direction that modern technology has gone. And this actually gives a little bit of a hint. For at least in real life, speaking of people, one of the better bets is to look for things that don't rely so much on very modern technology, hyper-modern technology, because hyper-modern technology, like last 20 years, 10 years, tends to go in the direction of being very individual, able to do it all on your own. Older technology tends much more to lend itself to being social. So, a great example, just from my own experience, is an archery club. An archery club is often a great way to meet people because you have a bunch of targets up and you talk to people as you're standing there shooting, and then wait for everyone to be finished before you go and get your arrows and so on. Gun clubs are more common if you're into firearms. They can be a great way to meet people. Knitting clubs. I haven't knit in years, but knitting clubs can be a great way. Different demographic you tend to find. And all these things will tend to have their demographics. So you want to pay attention to that at least a little bit. But there's another great thing, too, about these things that tend to span really long, I'm sorry, just to, before I move on to the next thought, just to finish the previous one, all sorts of things, cycling clubs, and anything around any sort of sport activity. Things like martial arts classes can be very good in this regard. Judo and karate and kendo and taekwondo and so on. All of these things can be good ways of meeting people as well. The thing about sporting activities, and again, this gets to the demographics, and now to shift to the demographic side, is that sporting type activities tend to skew younger. And there's some pluses and minuses to skewing younger. If they skew overly young, then people tend to get very, very specific. Like high school students. It's rare for high school students to make friends with other high school students, especially with younger adults. And there's some complications there. But any place where you find large age ranges, so any place that's not, very, very specifically about, activities that require youth, are especially good for young people to do, because when you can meet a large range of ages of people, you will be able to, your chances of making friends also helps. You might well make friends who are older than you. This is especially true for younger people. And that's especially good to make friends who are several decades older than you are. Can be a very, very valuable thing, especially when you're younger. So like if you're a teenager in your early 20s, making friends with somebody who's at least in their 40s or 50s is a really good idea. Making friends with someone who is in their 50s or 60s can be an excellent idea. It's a very, very mutually beneficial relationship, because somebody who is in their 60s, somebody who's in their 50s, somebody who's in their 40s relative to someone who's in their late teens or their early 20s, they have so much knowledge, they have so much wisdom that they have accumulated that they can pass on to you. There is so much, that saying about, it goes like, judgment comes from experience, and good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Well, there's an exception to that. Good judgment can also come from learning from other people's experience. But the thing is, they've got to be people who've actually had experiences. And that means people who are older than you are. So there's a lot that people who are older than you are have learned, both from things that have been passed on to them, as well as by just having tried stuff and gotten stuff wrong. And they can give you the benefit of that experience so that you can have better judgment without having gone through all of the hardships of having screwed up a lot on your own. So that is, in itself, for the younger person, a very good reason to have older friends. Several other very valuable reasons too. They really help to give you perspective. Young people suffer a great deal from having poor perspective. All of your problems look so much bigger when you're younger because you just haven't had that many problems in total. And as much as your problems are real, when you're 40, you've had a lot more problems just because you've been around for that much longer. When you're 50, you've had a lot more problems. And so you've got a much better perspective on what sort of problems are easy to survive, what sort of problems seem big at the time and aren't that big a deal, and so on. And perspective just rubs off on you. It really, really helps the younger person to be far more calm and centered and so on, to just be exposed to the perspective of somebody who's older, somebody who's just survived an awful lot of stuff. On the flip side, it's also very beneficial for the older person, because the older person gets the benefit of being able to give some of that wisdom that they have to a younger person. They really enjoy that. And it's really beneficial to them. So it's an incredibly mutually beneficial relationship to have friends who are significantly older than you are, and then as you get older, friends who are significantly younger than you are, as well as friends your own age. I don't mean to be exclusive, just to broaden out. So it's one of the major advantages. Another big advantage, incidentally, to going to places where there's a decent age range in people, especially if you get some retirees there, is retirees have a lot of time to make new friends. They're sort of, by age, and I can never keep track of what direction it looks like, but like there's something of a curve, with a depression in the middle, sometime in the 30s and 40s, where people have the least time for making friends. This corresponds a lot to when you have young children, incidentally. When you have young children, they just soak up an enormous amount of your time because they need so much from you as a parent. So you have very little time to make new friends when you have young children. When you're in your teenage years, when you're in your early 20s, you can make a fair number of new friends. Although the more you get into your 20s, you're coming up on marriage. You've got trying, if you're the sort of person who's going to have a husband or wife, and start a family, you need to be spending a lot of time on that job, setting up the rest of your life properly. So even there, it's not so great. Once you come out of that, once your children start becoming older, people start getting a lot more time for making new friends. Once you start getting into retiree age, a lot of people that will, they'll have a lot of their friends they'll have lost touch with, friends will have moved away. You're starting to get in the age where some of your friends will have died. And so they have a lot more time to make new friends with people as well. And this gets to the numbers game as well, because it's not just whether or not you and another person click. It's whether or not you click enough to overcome all of the other demands on each of your time. And so if you click with somebody decently, but they've got a lot of demands on your time, you may well never end up becoming friends because they don't have enough time. Whereas, for the same amount, you could have a good friendship with somebody who has more time. So there's, again, another real advantage here. So any sort of activity where people are there for the sake of being social and especially doing something together. The doing something together is very, very important because that puts you into contact with each other in a positive sort of environment. That's a really good strategy. I'm very hesitant about anything that's purely negative, though. A lot of modern politics, for example, which is about like how awful the other political group is. Very little of modern politics is about like how good our actual principles are, because as is easily observed, people's principles are very flexible right now. So people don't talk about positive things nearly as much as they talk about negative things in modern American politics. Outside of America, this may be a little bit different. You run into the same problem with atheism. It's really not where you want to look, because that trite saying, if you want to call it that, about what atheists have in common is like people who don't wear sweaters. There's nothing in common. Well, it's kind of true. It's not really a shared interest. I mean, yes, there are atheist meetups and such, but there's kind of a problem once you actually meet up. What are you going to actually talk about? Because you can't really talk about a negation, whether you want to define it as atheism as a lack of belief or the positive, disbelief. It's really kind of irrelevant to the point here. It's not going to do you much good. So that sort of thing, the things which are negative aren't really very good places to look for friends. They sort of have similarities, and the people will meet up about them, but they're workable. It's not that they're not workable, but the probability is much less in your favor. So I would stay away from negative things and look at positive things. Archery, you're trying to get good at shooting, at putting an arrow into a target. Knitting groups, you're trying to get good at knitting. You're also doing knitting. If you're at a swing dance group, you're trying to get good at swing dancing, and you're just having fun swing dancing. And so there are these positive things that you're making new things in the world because you have some vision of something that would be good and you're trying to achieve it. Very simple visions, that vision of the arrow actually in the target. That vision of, great swing dance move, hitting the beats really well. Whatever exactly it is, it's a positive vision, and the positive vision is a good way to bring people together. So stick to the positive things, and things that are meant to be social also have the advantage of everyone who's there is probably open to making new friends. Places like the grocery store, for example, or the gym, much less so, because people are there for a very individual reason. When you go to the grocery store, you want to get your groceries and get home. It's not that you can't start a conversation in the grocery store. It's not what you're there for. So something's got to go really, really right for somebody else to try to strike up a conversation with you in the grocery store, and for you to actually want to be in that conversation rather than just trying to get out as fast as possible. And again, with the gym and so on. So you want to pick places where people are probably intending to be social when they go there. And again, as I said, if you can't think of interest like this, well, step one then is to start looking into what sort of interests can you develop. Look through them and see which ones actually look kind of interesting to you, and then put the effort into developing that interest so that you actually find the thing interesting. Because if you find it interesting, then everything will work when you actually go there and then start meeting people. I really don't recommend trying to fake an interest in something, whether to yourself or to others. Um, like really genuinely cultivate these interests because it needs to be real for any of this to work. Um, so there's that. So that's real life stuff. The other thing, and this being YouTube is equally relevant, is meeting people online. And here again, the same basics apply. It's adapted a little bit differently. And there's some difficulties that arise because, in an awful lot of places, nobody's using their real name, and it's hard to actually keep track of people if they kind of disappear. So one of the things about making friends that is still the same is finding places where you have common positive interests. But there's the added thing that real life always segregates itself into small groups. There's some minor exceptions. I don't recommend trying to make friends at like a concert because there aren't small groups of people. Everyone's focused on one thing. That doesn't work. You need someplace that will break into small groups. Online, again, you need to find things that will break into small groups. So, for example, replies to a reasonably popular person's tweets, if you're on Twitter. The comment sections of blogs tend to be kind of moderately popular. Blogs tend to be in the right sort of direction. Like once you start getting several hundred comments, the same sort of thing can apply to YouTube comments as well. When you get like a few comments to a few dozen comments per post or what have you, that can really work. When you start getting to the several hundred, it gets really iffy because your odds of actually finding anyone become a lot smaller. It's still doable though. You just have to be careful. When you start getting into places like, what is it, 4chan? I think it's 4chan. The anonymous, like anonymous image boards where people leave comments and everyone's anonymous or anon. Places like that tend to be, again, not completely impossible, but because there's no good way of keeping track of anybody, even if you start to make friends with people, the odds of you two actually coming into contact with each other more than a little bit are kind of small, and you can just so trivially easily drift away from each other, which is why it's a really good idea to focus on places where there is some ability to direct people towards a private messaging interface. This can involve someplace where you feel free to put your email address out there. Like blog comments, because they're not read all that often, and so on. If you've got decent spam filtering, etc., you can put your email address. It's a lot better though, given the nature of that. Like if it's anywhere where it's like you can make contact with somebody on someplace like Twitter, Facebook, etc., that has direct messaging, so you can exchange email addresses and actually keep in contact with people once you've moved on to the actually being friends stage. Of that relationship. So that's sort of the way you adapt this to online is find some place that has enough of the properties of real life that you can find people, you can find them often enough to actually hold a bunch of conversations, and you can find some way of making the thing last past the the initial getting to know you stage, if it's any place that is any place that's anonymous, basically. I tend to dislike Facebook because Facebook is a wonderful way of losing real life friends. Facebook's a horrible mismatch for how human beings interact with each other normally, because it feels private and yet it's sort of public, and it's I left Facebook after getting into some fights with people I'd never have gone into fights with in real life. So I can't recommend Facebook for this. Possibly for meeting strangers it might work. But I'd be very careful about this because the problem is if you become friends on Facebook, then you see each other's feeds and stuff. And the Facebook feed is like, if somebody designed a way to lose you friends, the Facebook feed would not take many modifications to become that thing. So that's the thing about online stuff. Look for places that have a reasonable enough traffic you're going to meet a bunch of people, not so much traffic that once you meet them, you'll never see them again. So it's sort of a sweet spot in between those two things. Some way of actually exchanging enough private information that you can keep in touch afterwards. You don't have to be, then become pen pals or something, but like just that you can keep in touch so that you can reunite even on a different platform is very valuable, because if you can't actually hold on to your friends, making them doesn't do you very much good. Um, so that's really the adaptations to an online sort of thing. And then just remember, in all of it, it's a numbers game. Get out there, talk to a lot of people, um, share things, put forward some opinions that are interesting, opinions that someone else might want to add to. In general, you will tend to make friends a lot better if the two of you can add to each other's opinions rather than arguing with each other. Again, it varies, but building, it tends to bring people together much more than does arguing. Um, Unless you're looking to make friends with Greeks. Half Greek by heritage, and at least the Greek side of my family, we love dearly to argue. All the same, especially if this is in online environments, textual arguing is very easily turns to quarreling, because people um, tend to take things often in the worst sort of way, and there just isn't all of the cues, the tone of voice and facial expression and so on, to indicate what you really mean, and to qualify what your meaning is. So that's why in an online context, it's especially important to stay much more positive than you need to be in your spoken language, because your spoken language is so augmented by your body language and your tone of voice and so on. So, things where you can be kind of positive. I don't mean like chipper cheerful, nothing's ever wrong. I just mean where you can actually have like productive conversations where you build on ideas and genuinely share things together, where the two of you are better off for it. Okay. So, and the note that I said about female friendships. And again, I have no experience with female friendships, no direct experience with female friendships, for obvious reasons, and so I can't comment on them directly. There are a few points though. If the YouTube demographics are correct, about 95% of the people who watch my videos are male, and I have a strong suspicion, given that the other 5% are many of the other 5% anyway, are the unusual sort of women who either find it just as easy to make friends with men, or find it easier to make friends with men than with women. And on that point, making friends with men is therefore not going to be that difficult, because if you're one of those rare women, then, well, you already make friends with men, and everything I said basically just applies, because there's at least one man in the relationship. It does apply to making friends for women, to make friends with women as well. But the thing is, there's some other aspects to female friendships. They're more holistic in some sense, from descriptions that I've heard from women. That female friendships they're a bit more explicitly like alliances. And then there's a lot of stuff that goes on within these bonds, because one of the things that women commonly do is a sort of externalized emotional processing, where dealing with your own emotions can be difficult. So you externalize them to a friend, a trusted friend, who then helps you to process them, partially by reflecting the emotions back at you. It's a complex thing I don't fully understand, and not all women do it, but it is a common sort of thing, and this sort of externalized processing of emotions, it's tricky and it's complicated, at least from a male perspective. Many women do it intuitively. The women who find it easier to make friends with men than with women probably don't. And if you want to make friends with women, you need to learn how to do this, because the thing is, another woman is going to expect you to interact with her on sort of female terms. And so if you want that relationship to actually work, you're going to need to learn how to make a female relationship work with all of its complexities. And especially its sort of externalized emotional processing, it's sort of more holistic alliance building and so on. So all I can do is sort of point in that direction, because I don't know the specifics of it. But if you're in that position as a woman trying to make friends with other women, you may work to find those other rare women who find it easier to make friends with men than with women, because they may be sort of more similar in how they deal with friendships, and more willing to accept a sort of narrower, more shared interest-based friendship, like the friendships between men and, well, pretty much anyone. Um, so that may be an avenue, and the other thing is to just learn, and to do your best to learn. Unfortunately, the nature of the thing being very complex, most of the people who can do it don't explain it. At least I've never heard of a woman who is good at female-female friendships who explain how female-female friendships work to men, or to women who have an easier time making friends with men than with women. If anyone finds such a resource, I would dearly love to read it. So if you do, please let me know. Find my email address. It's on my website, and email me, because that'd be a wonderful thing to read, but it just doesn't seem to really be out there. In general, very, very complex activities tend not to have descriptions of how they work. They tend to just be like, you learn by apprenticeship. In the same way, like, you don't tend to find much in the way of books about how to do swing dancing. It's a very intricate, like Lindy Hop, it's a very intricate, complex activity that you learn by doing, by trying, by apprenticeship, not really by description. Okay, so that covers, I think that covers pretty much everything as sort of an introductory, getting started sort of thing. So I hope at least some people found this useful. To anyone who's trying to make friends, I wish you luck. You just need to keep trying. Don't let yourself get daunted, because you will find people with whom you make friends. You just have to keep on trying. A lot of luck applies, because it depends on who you run into. You might run into a lot of people who you're just not well suited to be friends with, and then finally you'll run into some people who you are. It's like so many things in life, success is about trying, because you just have to keep on getting up and trying again until you finally get lucky. So until next time, may you hit everything you aim at,